Hello everyone, I'm Alison Ingleby, science fiction and fantasy author, and this is the first in a brand new weekly video series which I'll be putting out every morning. Now you may know that I'm part of a really exciting new book set which is coming out next year called Cursed Lands. We're aiming to hit the USA Today bestseller list, so I'll be talking about this quite a lot over coming months. I'm writing a brand new book for the box set, and it'll be the first in a new series which is launching next year in 2019. And I really wanted to share with you the process of creating this book from start to finish and sort of bring you with me on that journey as I go through it. So this video series will hopefully give you a bit of an insight into my writing process, the things I think about before I write, and while I'm going through developing the story and the characters and the books. So according to my schedule, I'm due to start the first draft this week. I currently still don't have a finalised title for the book. I have a series title, so it'll be book one in the Shadow City series. And I've got a couple of different options for titles, but I haven't decided on one yet. So I definitely need to do that over the next few weeks. I also don't actually have character names for a lot of my characters. I know who the characters are, I have a picture in my head, but one of the things I really struggle with when writing is coming up with names for the characters. And I guess they're kind of like your babies. I'm not a parent myself, but I'm sure it is an incredibly difficult thing to come up with a name for your child, and particularly when it comes to sort of my protagonist, my main character, and the other sort of significant characters in a series. It often takes me a while to come up with the right name, so I may start off using a kind of placeholder name, just so I can get writing and get into the story. So I'm not really that worried about these things yet, because that's just the way I work. A lot of the time when I'm writing, things will come to me as I write the story and develop the story. The one thing that I have put quite a lot of work into and been thinking about is what I want the book to feel like and what sort of themes are going to come out in it. And that's really what I want to talk a bit about today. So if you've read any of my books, you know I'm primarily a dystopian author at the moment. So this book will be a dystopian book. It'll be in a dystopian setting, but it will also have some fantasy elements and a bit of a fantasy feel to it. So just to give you a little bit more of a teaser, I guess, for what it's about. It's set in dystopian Las Vegas. The protagonist is a young woman who is cast out of her society into an underworld sort of world or society which is ruled by different factions. She also discovers that she has particular powers, and that these powers are dangerous and that they can kill people. So a lot of the first story is really about her kind of coming to terms with this, how she fears her powers and also fears the society which she has ended up in and has been taught to fear that, and what happens around that. So I don't want to give any spoilers away, so I'm not going to discuss it in great detail. But what I wanted to talk about today was really about the inspiration for this book, and more generally where I get inspiration from. And I think that the first thing that came to me when I was thinking about what I wanted to write next is about the feel of the book and about books I love reading, and how I can try and create something that has a similar feel, that hopefully other people who like similar books that I do will love reading. So as a writer, I read a lot. I've actually lost count of the number of books that I've read this year. I was going to keep a tracker and I've completely failed, but I suspect I must be up around 50 books at least. And I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy mainly. I do enjoy other genres, but because I write in these genres, I like to keep up with what books are coming out, and also to read a lot of the old classics, and books from 10, 20 years ago, which are also really popular. So I'd say there are 3 books which I've read or reread this year, which have really kind of influenced what I want to achieve with this book and the new series. The first of those is the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown, which I've been listening to with my husband on audiobook, and I absolutely love. It's definitely gone up there with one of my all-time favourite series. And I think, you know, Pierce Brown has a fantastic way of creating a huge world filled with complex, interesting characters. That is also dystopian science fiction. It does have a bit of a fantasy feel to it, and it has some sort of Roman mythology in there as well. The second book is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. Again, I think I read this book in a weekend, sort of 2 days, less than 2 days, which for me is unheard of because usually I don't get that amount of time to read. Again, she had really gripping characters. It's a dystopian book, and but it's sort of dystopian fantasy, so it's a bit of a crossover. And the third book is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, which was actually a reread. So I'm old enough to remember the original BBC TV series of Neverwhere, which was shown in the UK. And I loved that TV series. I then bought the original version of Neverwhere and read it back when I was a teenager. And since then, Neil Gaiman has reissued the version. So he made some updates to the book, and he issued it, I think, about maybe 13 years ago. So I wanted to reread that again, and that also inspired a few kind of thoughts in my mind. So I think some of the things which I loved, which span across these books, are around the world building, the blending of sort of fantasy elements in a more real world setting. So if you haven't read Neverwhere, for example, it's set in London, but it sort of spans between real day, modern day London, and this sort of underworld London that takes place underneath the city, which is a more fantasy world. So it's a classic sort of urban fantasy book, and it's brilliant. The other thing that I love about all of these books are the characters, and the authors have done such a good job of creating characters who you just fall in love with. So a couple of my particular favourites are Severo from the Red Rising series, and the Marquis de Carabas from Neverwhere. And they're both characters which have a little bit of humour to them. They're not always serious, and they do make you smile, but they make you really root for them as well. The other thing that kind of spans across these is really the idea of a divided society, but not so much two societies coexisting, but almost two different societies which are completely separate. So it's almost two different worlds, and that made me wonder, okay, well, what would it take to break down the barriers between those worlds? So that was the kind of feel I wanted to create it. When it came to the setting, I was quite practical about this, actually. So we planned a trip to the States this year, and we were visiting Las Vegas as part of that. And as an author, you can do a lot of research on Google about places. I mean, Google Street View is amazing, but there's nothing like actually going to a place and kind of getting a bit of a feel for it in person. So as we were going to Vegas, I thought, some people might say Vegas is a dystopian city already, but if not, it's a perfect place to create, a dystopian version of that city. And then the rest of my kind of inspiration and research, a lot of it comes from the internet and just generally browsing and kind of following my instinct down different rabbit holes. And it's easy to kind of get lost in the internet and spend hours researching different things which don't really go anywhere. But I think that kind of fills a lot of the creative well and gives me a lot of ideas which don't immediately lead to thoughts about what I will do with the book, but they linger in my mind, and they're at the back of the mind. And then for me, it's really important to kind of let these ideas settle and to let the thoughts that come out of that come out naturally. So what I often find is that my kind of inspiration for stories, or for how to get over a particular plot point or work out what's happening to characters next, comes to me when I'm doing some form of exercise. Often it's walking, so I really love going walking and just thinking and mulling things over. The sort of concept for this book, so the Shadow series, book 1, actually came to me while I was mountain biking a couple of months ago. So I was up in Northumberland, which is in northeast England, we're in a place called Kielder Forest, and Kielder Forest has lots of hills. So when we're mountain biking, to go down the hills, which is the fun part, you have to go up them. So I had a really long slog up lots of hills. And to take my mind off the discomfort of pedaling up hills, I started thinking about my story and what kind of world would be. And I actually got back from that bike ride, sat in our camper van and typed out a sort of page and a half of notes, which would then sort of form the initial backbone of the series. So that's where I got my inspiration from. The other thing I will be doing while I'm developing the series is I'll be keeping a note of pictures and stuff on my Pinterest board, so I'll put a link to that in the comments. I'll also put a link to Cursed Lands, which you can pre-order now. It's available on Nook, iBooks, Kobo. It will be coming on Amazon, but not for a few more months. So if anyone would like to support me and all the other 22 authors who are putting books into, or 21 other authors who are putting books into the box set, we would really appreciate that. And you can support us by pre-ordering it on one of those platforms. So I'll be back next week, and I'll be talking about a different component of my storytelling and world building, and also letting you know if I actually started writing it this week, which I should be, so you can keep me accountable. Okay, that's all for now.